So I kind of figured, okay, if I can't necessarily find a way out of it through those means, then I'm just going to distract myself. That's the easiest thing to do. I'm just not going to have these thoughts. And through that, I was engaging in, I guess, what people would call maybe risky behavior, a number of things, any sort of extreme sport, I was always the first to raise my hand, whether it was paragliding, rock climbing, whatever it was. It culminated in me buying a motorbike, which is not a bad thing inherently, as long as you're very careful as to how you ride. But I kind of took up that activity for the wrong reasons. And that was kind of what made me sort of realize that I had to find some other way to deal with my issues. I still wasn't willing to say anyone about it. So I continued researching ways to just sort of build positive mental health, as it were. And this research kind of led me on to mindfulness. It led me on to a certain individual who goes by the name of John Kabat-Zinn. And he's probably the foremost proponent of bringing mindfulness out of something that was mainly an Eastern source of philosophy into the mainstream of Western secular traditions. And reading his books, listening to what he was saying completely blew my mind, because his own approach was so different from what I'd been trying to do. And it's not something I'd actually really ever considered. His own central thesis was, listen, you're not meant to fight your thoughts. It's not a battle you can win, because human beings are not meant to be without thoughts. We're not meant to ever stop thinking. But what you can do is to change the relationship you have with your thoughts so that you're not as triggered by them. And his own means of doing this was through mindfulness meditation exercises. And through the course of like researching him, I happened to go on one of his exercise programs, so to speak, which was a 6-week program to practice these different mindfulness exercises and see what happens. I mean, by the end of the 6 weeks, it's not like a panacea. It's not like an off and on switch. That's not to say at the end of the 6 weeks, I had a complete turnaround with regards to my mental health. But it was very clear to me. And it was actually even clear to others that there had been some sort of change. And that's the thing about mindfulness. You'd notice it's more than likely that those around you, those who are close to you, probably notice a change before you do. But I just noticed that I wasn't dwelling on thoughts as much. And I was able to make the distinction between thinking and taking on the thoughts I was having so personally. So the gains in mindfulness are real, and they are also incremental. So that's just a bit of a backstory. Now, looking at the particular talk for today, it's really around mindfulness as a mental health tool during a crisis. Now, I think we should really start from the top and maybe have a definition of what a crisis is, right? A crisis is a condition of instability or danger that leads to change. There are myriad types of crises, as it were. There's what can be a social, economic, political crisis, and which is probably more of our focus for today, crisis centered around health. It could be both physiological and psychological, with our own focus being psychological. Crisis can also be personalized or socialized. By that, I mean a personal crisis is one that you are experiencing by yourself. It's not necessarily something that is being experienced by the wider social group. Whereas a socialized crisis, and the perfect example of this is obviously COVID-19, is something that is being experienced by a wider community of people. And COVID-19 ticks all the boxes. It's a social crisis because people are not able to be as close to each other physically and otherwise. It's an economic crisis. People are losing their jobs, their source of income. It's a political crisis because it's being swayed one way or another depending on people's political views. And of course, it's a health crisis. So, but the thing about all these crises is they have, whatever the nature of the crisis, they all have one thing in common, which is they really tend to serve as an avenue to mental distress, which can manifest itself in many ways. The most common are really thoughts centered around depression, centered around anxiety over the future, what's going to happen. and other forms of mental suffering, basically. Now, you notice that all these states are an outcome of thinking, which actually is a positive in all of this, because what it means is that the challenge is coming from you and it's not something external, which means that you can marshal the resources internally to overcome these mental challenges. And I'll just quote Epictetus, who was a Stoic philosopher who lived in Roman times. And he has a quote today, which is really basically the cornerstone of a branch of psychotherapy known as cognitive behavioral therapy. And the quote goes, "Men are not disturbed by things, but they are disturbed by the meaning they give to things, essentially by their thoughts." Now, how does this relate to mindfulness? Well, mindfulness as a continued practice changes your relationship to your thoughts in such a way that you become less and less triggered by them. So it acts as really a path towards equanimity, which is the ability to have mental stability regardless of whatever is going on around you, for better or for worse. It's important to understand the interactions between thoughts, feelings, which is just another way of calling emotions, as well as behavior. To do this, I'm going to share a slide, which I think the visual representation of what I'm bringing forth is going to be important. So if you just bear with me a minute, I'm going to share a slide. And I promise it's the only slide I'm going to share. Okay, here you go. So I'm guessing you can see my slide. You could maybe just, Karen, maybe you can speak to that. Is my slide up and running?
Yes, it is. I can see clearly.
Okay, fantastic. So just a little bit more about thoughts. We have, as human beings, we have what psychologists term a negative bias when it comes to our thoughts and thinking. And this is really, it kind of stems back, it stems back to a long time ago when human beings were basically hunter-gatherers, right? And we were in the wilderness, on the plains of the savannah, what have you. And our main source of sustenance was going out to hunt for prey, to feed ourselves and our community, right? But of course, the thing about what that means is when you're going out hunting, you have to be on the lookout for tiger, for other animals for which you are their prey, right? And not the other way around. So in the process of this being the case, humans develop a sense for danger. So that means there's been a study to say that out of 8 things you are presented with, human beings would see the danger in 7, because we needed that. It was essential to our survival to always be on the alert for predators. And that is something that has been carried forth from primitive man to contemporary man. It's just that now it becomes a bit maladaptive because we don't have the same kind of, at least for most of us, particularly those that live in urban dwellings, we don't have the same kind of dangers as our ancestors did back in the day. But that twist of mind is something that is still ever present, right? And the reason that's a problem is because research has shown that human beings, on the average, think about 60,000 thoughts per day. And out of these 60,000 thoughts, 90% of those thoughts you are thinking today, you've already thought of yesterday, right? So you can now imagine if you have all those three in some sort of cocktail. You have a negative bias, you think 60,000 thoughts per day, of which 90% you thought yesterday, meaning it's hard to break out of negative thinking. Then it's a bit of a vicious cycle, yeah? And the way this works, the way to break out of this is to actually understand how all of these interactions play out in our mental landscape. So we have thoughts, emotions, and behavior that exist in basically a triad, in a triangle. And they are all interrelated and interdependent. They are also unidirectional in the way they influence each other, meaning your thoughts influence your emotions influence your behavior. And consequently, your behavior can influence your thoughts, can influence your emotions. You can also start from the emotions that influence your thoughts, that influence your behavior. So it's a bit of a roundabout thing that has a profound psychological effect on those that find themselves in a certain type of thinking. And to make it just a bit more concrete, I'll give you an example of this. Imagine you're at work, right? And you get an email from maybe a colleague of yours, right? And you perceive this email, again, a perception, you perceive this email to be, I don't know, somewhat rude or snarky. And that within you triggers anger, right? So you now proceed to stand your ground and reply back to the person in what you believe is the most passive aggressive way, whereas really it's just aggressive, and you send off the email. Yeah. So that's an example of your thoughts. Yeah. This all started with your thoughts and manifests as your thoughts. Your thought that this person is being rude or is being disrespectful. And again, it's a thought. You really don't know whether that's the case, particularly in email where a lot of things are lost in communication. So this thought now triggers an emotion. That is the emotion of anger. Yeah. And this anger then leads to the very antisocial behavior of sending an email that is probably maybe even worse than the initial offense you adjudged it to be. Yeah. So that's just a sort of practical example of how, and I'm sure all of us, because this is something that we deal with every day in our life, all of us have examples of this. But even just understanding the interplay between these three elements, just understanding that alone really is enough to shift the quality of your life to a more positive, stance when it comes to your mental landscape. And the thing about it is, like I mentioned about the email, the thoughts, you have no clue, no idea whether that thought is true or whether it's false, right? But there's something very peculiar and curious about human beings. Because we have the thoughts alone is enough to make us believe it, right? We don't even question it. I would say 90% of the time, the thought just comes to mind and it must be true. Bam. Then what then happens as a second order effect? Because you've now had this thought, that thought elicits an emotion in you. And in the case I gave, it's anger. So that anger now acts as some sort of validation, some sort of confirmation of a thought that you had that is not even real to begin with. So it's a bit of a crazy thing. It's almost like a form of self-hypnosis, yeah, where you go into this state of mind where you believe whatever you say is true, and you then convince yourself by the physiological effect of that the emotion has relating to this thought. Yeah. And there's something to be said on emotions. There's something to be said about that as well, because research suggests that an emotion, right, unchallenged, only lasts for about a minute and a half without any perseveration of thought, meaning without using thought to fuel it over and over and over again. So say, for instance, you have some sort of disagreement with your spouse in the morning before you leave for work, right? That emotion of, let's call it anger in this case, that emotion of anger for everyone is different. So for some people, you feel it maybe in your chest. For some people, maybe you feel it in your back of your throat, but there's a real physiological feeling that comes with this emotion. If you are just to sit with that and just to kind of let it go, what they're saying is after a minute and a half, you're fine, right? But if you continue reinforcing with the further thoughts, I can't believe he said that. Why would he say that? Maybe it means this, maybe it means that. That's the difference between being upset for a couple of minutes and being upset for the rest of the day, which obviously has knock-on effects for your interactions that day with other people and with other endeavors that you have to get done during the day. Yeah. So as I said, that's the only slide I'm going to share. If you just give me a minute, I will just pull up just a minute. Okay, so I think that sets the scene very well for going into the description of mindfulness properly. And actually, I'm going to step back because before we talk about mindfulness, it's important to talk about meditation, because a lot of people have notions of meditation and may not be too clear what it is. So I'll just try to maybe shed some light on that a bit more. All meditation is meditation is the art of cultivating attention and awareness. That's all it is. I think there's nothing mysterious about it. There's nothing esoteric about it. It's just about cultivating a set of habits that keep you in the present moment, that keep you alert, that keep your attention and your concentration. That's all. People have different means. It's a room that has many doors to get into, right? And I like to, when I'm talking about meditation, I like to give as many analogies and metaphors as I can do, because it's something that I recognize for a lot of people is somewhat abstract, right? So if you think about meditation as the same way you think about sports, you have, say we take, for example, you have football, you have basketball, you have tennis, right? These are three sports that I think everyone can relate to. All these three sports have their own rules and regulations, and they have their own standards by which you judge whether you have winners or whatever, right? But they all, regardless, particularly if you are doing them well, they all result in physical fitness. Yeah, that's the common denominator between all of them. Meditation is similar. There are so many different types of meditation. Almost every tradition in this world has meditation. If we're talking about the Christian tradition, it's you then invoke the Catholic tradition with the monks in the monastery, the rosary beads. Muslims have something similar. The Stoic philosophers have something similar. So it's nothing that is unique, and that's because the human experience has shown to prove that there's a lot of benefit to be had in being able to be present and not to be lost in thoughts, right? But all of these types of meditation, regardless of where they originate, they all have, like similar to sports that trains physical fitness, all these types of meditation train mental fitness. You can almost think of it as a gym for the mind. Yeah. So that's just a general note on meditation. Now, mindfulness is a type of meditation in which you pay attention to a certain cue or a certain object of attention, which could be your breath, it could be sounds, it could be sensations, even in your body. You can use anything as an object of attention, right? Because it's really about focusing. And each time, as you're paying attention to this cue, each time you get distracted, you bring your attention back to what it is you are focusing on, right? And it's the repetition of this that builds your ability to focus. Yeah. Because what will happen is once you start to meditate, invariably you're going to get distracted. That's how the mind works. We think all the time. So thoughts will come as a distraction. Once that happens, you just bring it back to your breath. And what you're doing there, again, I'll use the gym metaphor. It's kind of similar to you go to the gym and you want to build your biceps. So you're doing bicep curls, right? You're not going to do just one curl and let the weight go. No, to build muscle, you're going to do several repetitions of the bicep curls. And you're going to work against resistance. You're going to work against the resistance from the weight of the dumbbells you're using, as well as the action of gravity on the dumbbells that builds resistance, right? That is similar to, that resistance is similar to the resistance you get from being distracted by thoughts. So that's really about mindfulness. And again, with mindfulness, you're not trying to stop your thoughts. All you're doing is just changing how you relate to your thoughts. And you can think of this maybe as, maybe the metaphor here is, think of a flowing river, right? The flowing river, call it the River Niger. The flowing River Niger represents your thoughts. And the river can flow either gently. There are times when the river is very calm, and there are times where the river is very violent and flows very aggressively. Without mindfulness or without some understanding of you, when you're lost in thoughts, the analogy there is that you're in the river, right? The river is flowing and you're in the river. When the river is flowing gently, it's all fine. It's not a problem. When the river is flowing violently, you're getting swept up in the rapids of the river and you've completely lost control, right? Now, what mindfulness meditation does is that it takes you out of the river and it situates you firmly on the river bank. Yeah. So you can see with that, the river is still flowing. That means your thoughts are still going, but you're not lost in thoughts because you're acting almost as a witness to your thoughts, as a third party observer, which loosens that emotional tenor that your thoughts would otherwise encapsulate you in, right? So that's really what mindfulness is attempting to train. Now, coming back to the triad, you can see that mindfulness addresses both thoughts and emotions, right? Because if you're able to stand back and witness your thoughts, you're also witnessing your emotions. And indirectly, it also affects your behavior. Because when you change your thoughts, you change the way you feel, you change how you act, for certain. Which takes me to a quote by Viktor Frankl, he was a psychiatrist. He was a Jewish psychiatrist that was caught up in the Second World War. He was in a concentration camp. He has a remarkable story that I would implore anyone to research. He has a book, a very popular book called Man's Search for Meaning. Anyway, Viktor Frankl has this quote that I think that encapsulates what I've described perfectly. He goes, between stimulus, right, and response is a space. And within that space is your choice. Within that choice is your freedom, right? So a thought comes to your mind doesn't mean you just have to react. Mindfulness trains you on how to widen that space between stimulus and response so that anything that you do is what you actually want to do. It's not a hijack of your emotional brain and is measured. And in that, even in the way it's worded, he says between stimulus and response. He doesn't say between stimulus and reaction, because response really connotes that there's something that has gone into what you're doing afterwards, whereas reaction is almost knee-jerk. Yeah. So mindfulness grounds you in the present moment, because coming back to thoughts, we're typically, when we're lost in thought or when we're mind wandering, we typically have two types of thoughts. We have thoughts that are centered around the future, which can be thoughts around anxiety and worry, which is particularly understandable in times of crisis, right? Or we have thoughts that are centered around the past, which are thoughts to do with rumination and regret, maybe over something that you feel should have gone a certain way. So what mindfulness does is it roots you in the present moment, because that is really the only moment in time that you can affect anything that really would be of benefit to your future and the future of those that you care about. Now, just to talk a bit about mindfulness, and I'm a scientist by background. I'm an engineer by background, so I always like to have an understanding of how these things have an overlap. Not that they have to, but have an overlap where possible with the scientific field, right? So up until, I'd say, maybe the 70s or so, mindfulness was seen as something that was completely outside of the scientific fold, right? But between then and now, a lot of research has been done. Neuroscience, in neuroscience in particular, there are a plethora of researchers I would employ you to look up, one of them being Richie Davidson, who are at the forefront of neuroscience and explain how mindfulness, the scientific basis for mindfulness. And what they all agree on is that when you practice mindfulness, there's something that's going on in your brain, which is called neuroplasticity, right? The brain is constantly being reshaped throughout our lives by our experience and our thoughts. So the practice of mindfulness, right? The more you practice being in the present, being free from worry and anxiety, the stronger the neural pathways that encode this behavior become. So that's to say, with enough practice, it goes from being a habit, right, to something that then becomes a trait in your brain because you've basically rewired your neural pathways. And actually, in mindfulness, when they talk about people's different stages within mindfulness or meditation, there's a quote that I like. There's a quote, the first part of the quote goes, with mindfulness, nothing comes. So meaning that you are going to be distracted for a while when you're practicing, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually part of the practice. Then there's the middle stage. So that's the early stage of the practice. The middle stage of the practice, they say nothing stays. meaning that you're starting to take those moments of presence where you can sustain being present for long periods of time, and you can sustain the equanimity and the mental health effects that come with that. Then they say there's a late stage of practice, which is nothing leaves, which is you've practiced to such an extent that for long periods and for long durations during your day, you can remain present. So that's just a little about the neuroscience of mindfulness. So now we've talked a lot about what mindfulness is. I think it's also worthwhile talking about what mindfulness isn't. Yeah, mindfulness isn't about blanking your mind. It's not about turning off your thoughts. That's never a goal of mindfulness, and it's not even humanly possible. Human beings were not designed not to think. So it's a misconception people have. In fact, the whole human project that's taken us as far as we have, what we've achieved as a species of people, is because of our very well-attuned ability to think and to make things happen. So mindfulness is not about stopping your thoughts. Mindfulness also isn't about trying to achieve some sort of special states. People have these concepts of nirvana, and they almost expect that mindfulness is achieving a state that is akin to, I don't know, being on drugs, being high or something, where you have this flood of dopamine. No, where you are right now is fine. No one is trying to change that. What trying to make sure that where you are right now, you make the most of that by being as mentally sharp and present as you can be. So let's maybe talk about some benefits of mindfulness. The first benefit is emotional regulation, which I've spoken a lot to during the course of this talk. It causes a decrease in anxiety and worry, which subsequently increases your resiliency. Because you're able to face life without being bogged down by your emotions. Inappropriately placed, I should say. There's nothing wrong with emotions. The mindfulness also benefits your cognition. That's your ability to think, actually. It improves your cognition. And that works on a couple of levels. So to do this, maybe we should just briefly speak about the brain and the way it's structured, right? You have basically three parts to your brain. You have what is known as your reptilian brain, which is like your lowest brain, sits just above your spinal cord. And that aspect of your brain or that part of your brain is implicated in regulating parts of your function as a human being that you have. So say, for instance, your heartbeat, that's your brain doesn't trust you to manage that. That's managed autonomous by your reptilian, coming from your reptilian brain. Then sitting on top of that is what is known as your limbic system, which is your emotional brain. This is like basically the main part, or the part of your brain that is implicated in mediating your emotional life or your emotional experiences, whether that's joy, whether that's sadness, whether that's happiness, whatever it is due to what is going on in your limbic system, in your emotional brain. Then at the very top, right, is what you have, what is known as your rational brain, or your prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for all your executive functioning. So everything that you've done from the time you're born to today that has to do with thinking, that has to do with interacting with people, that has to do with your achievements, academic or otherwise, is due to the high function prefrontal cortex. Now, what happens is when you're in a state of stress or you're feeling distress, and you experience what is known as emotional hijack, where your limbic system starts to substitute for your prefrontal cortex. Yeah, and this is why people make rash decisions, maybe when they're feeling a bit emotional, and why the older they just sleep over it and come to a decision in the morning. That's kind of that speaks to that to a certain extent. So, but what happens in mindfulness is the neural pathways between your prefrontal cortex and your emotional brain are strengthened, such that your prefrontal cortex now is able to regulate your limbic system in a manner that would otherwise not be available to you outside of a deliberate practice, which helps you obviously with better decision making and focus in general. So that's one way in which it improves your cognition. Another way in which it improves your cognition is really to do with improved memory, right? So a lot of us, I know, as we kind of get older and get on in the years, we have this feeling or sensation that, our memory is not as sharp as it used to be, right? We seem to forget things more easily. And, some people maybe just go full hypochondriac and maybe they believe they have early onset dementia, which is, I'm here to tell you that's not the case, right? Most times, more than ever, what is happening is that you are not paying attention in the moment that would then lead to what in the future would be in memory, right? As obvious as that sounds, that's actually what is happening in a lot of cases. And if you're not paying attention, obviously you're not going to be able to remember it in the future, right? So what I would posit to you is that you don't have a memory retention problem. You probably have more an attention deficit problem, which mindfulness is really able to resolve. Yeah. So the third benefit I'll talk about is more to do with the physiology, which is mindfulness helps reduce chronic stress. And chronic stress has been known to be a factor when it comes to diseases such as diabetes, heart diseases, cancer to a certain extent, because all these diseases are linked to long-term inflammation of the body, which is linked to chronic stress, right? So mindfulness is able to help resolve chronic stress. And now let me be absolutely clear. I'm not saying that mindfulness is a cure for cancer or for any of these ailments, but I'm saying that mindfulness will lead to a lifestyle change that would lessen the probability of you contracting all these ailments. Yeah. And so just to sort of finish up at some theory and kind of loop back to crisis. A crisis always presents uncertainty, that's for sure. But the thing about it is uncertainty could either have an upside or it could have a downside, yeah? But you can only see the opportunity, which is the upside that follows a crisis, and take advantage of it if you've cultivated the right mental habits ahead of time, yeah? And mindfulness is a powerful tool for cultivating these habits. So that's just, I'd like to maybe close out at least the theoretical with regards to that. I know we still have a bit of time and we will definitely have a Q&A session. But before we do, there's something about talking about mindfulness and I guess other things as well, where the theory, there's a practical experience that helps locks in the theory, and the example here is like, I'm an avid swimmer, right? And I can describe to you how to swim. I can describe to you how to tread water to make sure you don't sink. I can describe to you how to, as much as possible, execute the best freestyle you can, but you would never have an understanding of what swimming is like and be able to swim until you get into the water yourself. So with that, I would like us to, before we take Q&A, maybe have something that is a bit more experiential when it comes to mindfulness. Yeah, I'll just take us to, I'll lead us through maybe 2 exercises. The first exercise is more a breath exercise to invoke relaxation, the relaxation response in moments maybe you feel a bit overwhelmed or you feel a bit stressed or you feel angry or, to do with these sorts of emotions. Then after that, we'll do a very, very short mindfulness breathscape practice. So I hope everyone is ready. I'll lead you through the breathing exercise for relaxation. So I'll describe the exercise to you. What you're going to do is for 4 seconds, you're going to draw in breath. You're going to draw in that breath so you count 4 seconds in your mind for 4 seconds. Then once you've done that, you're going to hold that breath for 7 seconds. After you've counted off the 7 seconds, then you're going to release that breath. And this is very important. As you release that breath, you're going to release it for 8 seconds. So you're going to breathe out for 8 seconds up onto the last breath. Then you're going to repeat that a second time. So we'll just do 2 cycles of this. And I'll start off. I'll count us down from 3 to 1. So if everyone is ready, just make sure you're sitting comfortable. You know, there's just be very relaxed. There's nothing really to this. So 3, 2, 1. Okay, fantastic. I hope everyone's followed through with that. With that exercise, you probably feel maybe a bit. I expect you feel a bit relaxed, and that action is purely is purely physiological, right? What you have is there's something called the relaxation response, where you have a nerve in your body called the vagus nerve that stems all the way from the top of your head all the way through your body and branches out at different organs. And doing that sends out signals that cause your body to relax. So that's what's happening with that. We'll now do an actual mindfulness exercise, right? It's going to be a very exercise for just a couple of minutes. And the instruction here is focus on, for me, I like to focus where my breath is coming in through my nose, right? So I focus on the sensation of my breath there. For you, it might be maybe your diaphragm, where you notice your breath is acting on your diaphragm, right? And each time you get distracted, just don't beat yourself up about that. It's like I said before, it's part of the process. Just take your attention back to your breath and continue. Let's just do this for a couple of minutes. Yeah. Again, I'll count us down. This you can do, again, please do this seated comfortably. This you can do either with your eyes closed or your eyes open. I would suggest for the first time around, you do it with your eyes closed. It would be easier to focus on the exercise. Then in subsequent exercises, you can do it with your eyes open. I'll count us down from 3 to 1, then we'll go. So
sorry,
3.
Can you repeat the exercise again?
Okay. So all right, okay. Thanks for that, Karen. With this exercise, it's going to be it's called a breathscape exercise. You're going to focus on, and Karen, please let me know if you can hear me correctly. You can hear me well.
I can hear you now.
Okay. So with this exercise, it's called a breathscape exercise. You're going to focus on your breathing. You're going to focus on literally on your breath. As you draw in breath, you're going to focus on where that breath is more convenient for you to notice in your body. For me, it's my nostrils. People, it might be in your diaphragm, right? It might be that region of your diaphragm. And with this also, I should say, you're not meant to change. You're not meant to breathe in any particular way, right? Just breathe as you normally breathe and just follow on from there. So what you'll find is once you start breathing, you are going to almost immediately you're going to be distracted. You're going to have some thoughts. Maybe it's, oh, this exercise feels weird. Whatever it is, you're going to have a thought, right? Just notice that you're having that thought and just bring yourself back to your breath, right? And if everyone can hear me, we'll again just count down very briefly from 3 to 1. You can again do this with your eyes open or your eyes closed. I would say you do your eyes closed to begin with. Okay. All right. 3, 2, 1. Now, almost immediately, you're going to have the thoughts about the exercise. Yeah, the thought might be whether you're doing it right or whether you're doing it wrong. There's no right or wrong about this. Just notice that all you're having is a thought, and it's not It has nothing to do with what you're doing with regards to the exercise, and just gently let go of the thoughts and focus on your breath once again. You might just notice the coolness of your breath as you draw it in. You notice that your breath feels cold because of the ambient temperature of the air as you breathe in, and you notice that your breath is heated and feels warmer as you breathe out. So you can maybe use that as your locus of attention. You're not trying to achieve any sort of special state. So there's not meant to be anything that's going to out of the ordinary that's going to happen during this exercise or after the exercise. All you're doing here is just training your attention, with your breath being the object of attention this time around. You have a thought, just observe you have a thought, let it go, and bring your focus back to your breath. I'm going to count us down out of this exercise. And what else? Once you're done with the exercise, as much as possible, try and retain any sense of awareness or being present that you might have cultivated during the exercise. And if that hasn't quite come to you, then that's also fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's something that comes with practice. So I'll count us down from 3 to 1. 3, 2, 1. You can open your eyes. So I'm very keen to hear people's opinion as to what that felt like for you, and we'll use that as a way of opening the Q&A session, and we'll take questions once we have a few volunteers that are willing to share what that experience was like for them. So I'm all ears if anyone wants to go. Okay.
Wow, thank you very much, Sammy. They were quite relaxing, especially the first one. And the second one, I was torn between fighting between my thoughts and actually paying attention to the exercise.
Yeah.
So if we have questions, comments, and feedbacks regarding the exercise, you can just indicate by raising your hand or indicating in the chat box. Then if you indicate, if you want to voice over, that's fine. We'll unmute you to talk. But if you want to just comment in the chat box, I'll take your questions. So the first comment is from Cynthia. Cynthia, do you want to unmute yourself and speak, or I should just read ahead? You can tell me your opinion in the chat box as well. Hello, Cynthia, are you there? Cynthia, you're muted. Please unmute yourself.
Well, Cynthia, I think maybe you're having some connection issues, so I can read out your comment, which is I actually enjoyed it and realized that a lot of thoughts come in such a short time. That's actually the very first thing you realize once you start meditating, is you realize that actually your thoughts are non-stop. They are incessant, which, like I said, is not a bad thing. But with the practice, you're able to not necessarily be caught up and to channel your thoughts actually how you want them to go, depending on what the task at hand is or what it is that you want to get done. And of course, if it's just about making sure that you're not caught up in some sort of emotional maelstrom, you also have the tools. So it works for like whatever it is you want to do, because what is giving you basically is control over your mind and over your thoughts. Okay. So we have another question from my Oga at the top, Mr. Chikeze Wonso. And he goes, really enjoyed this, and it must be great to release stress of everyday life. How often in a day should you do these breathing exercises, or is it situational? Now, that's a fantastic question, and that's something that I think it's important to address. So for me, it's something that personally I do like every morning, and there's a reason for that. The way in the morning when you wake up, the way our minds are designed, our bodies are designed, is that when you wake up, there's you get a surge of this neurotransmitter called cortisol. I'm sure you are probably familiar with that. It can result in stress. It's the body's way of telling you to get up and get going, right? Which is not bad in itself. But if you're already dealing with some other challenges, then it becomes it can be a bit overwhelming. So for that reason, if you do the exercise in the morning, then it helps to really set the pace of your day in a way that is positive and is sustained. So I would say definitely do it in the morning. You can choose to do it at night if you want to. Then apart from that, also make time out to do a formal practice, that's maybe once or twice a week for 10, 15 minutes. Then you gear up as you feel you're getting maybe a bit more confidence and competence in it.
Thank you very much, Sachikeze, for that beautiful question. Thank you, Somi, for the answer as well. So, Daniela Mafe, your hand is raised up, so you can unmute yourself and come on now.
Okay, thank you, Karen. I can't use my video at the moment, so I hope that's fine.
Oh, that's fine, Daniela. We can hear you perfectly, so you can go ahead.
All right. So this breathing exercise is actually something somebody encouraged me to do, not even just somebody, my trainer. So, and this was actually to just help me with my breathing. So I didn't even know that it could help me in other ways. But whilst I was doing it, I wasn't having any, like, so many thoughts. I don't know if that's normal. I was most concerned about the numbers. You said count 1 to 4, taking breath, hold it for 7, drop it, count 8.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the only thing I was concerned about. I was not thinking about anything. I don't know if I was blank, but I was most concerned about 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 6, 5, 4, 1, 2, 3 to 8.
Yeah.
I wasn't thinking about anything else. So I don't know. Is that normal? Was I supposed to have like a flood of different things?
No,
Food, house, what?
at all. That's perfectly normal, So in as much as we're kind of lost in thoughts from time to time, we're also not always lost in thoughts. And what you'd actually realize is what you were doing is that part of the reason why you probably weren't having too many thoughts is because you were focusing on the exercise. So because that instruction was given to do 4, 7, 8, that is where your mind had gone. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And thank you for sharing that experience. I think it's not something that is useful for us all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. So there is another question from Ms. Tura. She says, thank you for such a relaxing relaxing and soothing exercise. For someone who has a short breath, what other exercise can you do to ease stress?
So by short breath, do you mean you have challenges breathing? Can we maybe unmute Miss Tora?
Okay,
Tora,
good
would you
evening,
like
everyone.
to? Sorry, Mr. Tora, can you
Hello,
take that
can
again?
you hear
Your
me?
connection was a bit. Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. What I meant by short breath is, we have to breathe in and count like 1 to 7. Most times I find it very difficult breathing in for a very long time, and like I lose breath easily. So what other exercise can I do aside that?
Okay, you can, well, two things. You don't necessarily, I mean, if you have particular issues with your breath, then I would advise maybe not to hold it in or to exhale for that long. Do it to a duration. With breath exercises, there are quite a number. Another thing you can do is you can do a breath exercise where you do a double inhale and a double exhale, which kind of has the same effect, you know? So that would look like, which might maybe be might maybe alleviate your concerns with regards to this particular 7-8 exercise. So that kind of works the same way, but you do it maybe for longer sessions or for longer repetitions, I should say.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so thank you everyone for your questions. If you have more questions, we still have about 2 minutes to take more. If you have questions or feedback regarding the session, these exercises, just indicate now. Okay, if there are no further questions, thank you very much for that engaging lecture. It was very exciting. The exercises as well were quite exciting. So I hope we all benefited from this the webinar today. The recording is going to be available. Apologies, I started recording late. I was quite overwhelmed with the setup, but then the bulk of the recording will be available. You can just send us a mail. I'll be putting up our social media handles where you can get across shortly. So I'm going to be leaving us with just a few a summary from this session. So mindfulness isn't about blanking your mind all the time. You're not meant to change your thoughts, change the relationship you have with your thoughts. So that was my personal take home from this session, and I hope we all benefited from it. So just a few announcements go. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And recall I mentioned that for the 24th of October, October is the month for breast cancer awareness. So we're going to be having our outreach then. If you want the recording, you want to engage with us, you can follow us. We are available on all as TF_NG on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and the Ijawele Foundation on LinkedIn. And if you want to partner with us, you want to sponsor this coming outreach, please, our bank account details are displayed on the screen. You can also send a mail to the Ijawele Foundation at gmail.com, the email that sends the invite for the webinar today. So thank you very much, everyone, for the session today. Thank you very much, Shegun. I really appreciate you coming um, on board, and I hope we all have a beautiful weekend and a exciting week ahead.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you very much, everyone.